Good afternoon, everyone. Give it another minute or two for additional folks to jump on, and then we will go ahead and kick off. Stand by. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. Thanks for joining, everyone. Just a few housekeeping items. First of all, welcome to the July edition of our Advanced Consult Group monthly call. Really appreciate everyone being here this afternoon. As a reminder, the intent of this call is to share updates with folks we consider to be experts in our broadband initiatives, and more than anything, receive feedback and hear from you all on your thoughts and comments and answer any questions. Make sure that we're taking everyone's feedback and guidance into consideration as we continue to move forward with the CBO's broadband initiative. So we've got a lot of exciting topics to go over today. We're going to start things off with Brandy, as she is going to provide an update on where we are with BEAD. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandy. Brandy, good afternoon. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jonas, and thanks for kicking us off today. Really excited. We're making progress on a lot of our goals right now, and we're learning as we're going, and we have more to update you each time we meet. So really happy with the team's work, as well as everybody who's supporting us in the field as we move through our programs. On BEAD in particular, I'm not going to show necessarily a slide deck because this information's on our website, but I just wanted to give you a little bit more detail as into what we're doing with our timelines and what it's going to take to meet our timelines. So as you guys know, obviously Volume 2 was approved, and it's set off several steps for us, and we have to have our grant program done in 12 months. It seems like a lot of time, but it's absolutely not a lot of time. But we are moving really quickly. And for us, we've had to stand up a lot of our program as we're going. So we didn't really have the benefit of having like a robust, grant application before heading into some of these program deadlines. So we're moving swiftly, and we have a great team supporting us. But first step is, we're developing those grant guidelines, and we are supposed to have our drafts from our consultants and reviewed by middle of this month, and we are going to launch those guidelines and a draft of our project area map this month. So we're looking at mid-month, so July is a big month for us. Phase 1 kicks off. I just want to say, ahead of all of it, that whatever we publish our draft, we have not made, they're not final. And so I want to put that out there, because sometimes when we put out drafts, I know it can be sort of interpreted as like this is what it's going to be, and the whole reason why we're putting them out for public comment is to get insight from our stakeholders. There's a couple of things that we really like to hear from, like usability. Does it make sense? And then secondly, are there any barriers? I mean, there's barriers all these programs, but are there like significant barriers in some of the language and implementation? on the other side of the house. And when I say other side, I mean and being able to construct these projects. Some of it's within our control, some of it's not in our control. So for example, some of our costing, and I put on the agenda like Make Ready, there's outside folks that are absolutely influencing our program. So really we want to get a heads up on what makes sense, how the usability of the program, as well as any hurdles that you're seeing that we can maybe try to address ahead of time. And so a lot of our grant guidelines are going to be, a lot of it comes from the NTI and the volume 2. So some of it we can't, well, a lot of it we can't change. We just want to make sure it makes sense, and things are clear. There's a lot of things in volume 2 that need clarification, mainly because it's not a grant guideline per se. It's the rule book for how we're going to run our programs. And so, but yeah, in the project areas as well, again, not final, these are drafts. So I just want to put that out there, and we'll caveat it whenever we put it out there as well. These are drafts, looking to perfect our maps. We're always looking to do that. And this program is no different. So with that, it'll take us, 30 days to run that process. And if we can launch at the middle of July, so the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be able to open our application at the end of August or early September. And we did promise summer, and I know sometimes we forget that summer also includes a little bit of September, so we're on track. And so those are the first 2 big steps for us. I will tell you, we are developing our grant portal as well at the same time. And so for us, critical path is going to be able to stand up. The biggest piece that's going to be able to stand up that grant portal. So if that grant portal is not ready to go, that could add for some slippage into our schedule. So I don't anticipate that happening, but you never know with software. We're trying to make it to eliminate the glitches and everything that sometimes happens when you launch a new portal. So we also have a lot of technical assistance to provide around the application launch. So you'll see a lot of that probably in August. Open office hours, but also mainly recorded videos of how to use the portal, and providing that that hands-on approach that we like to at the CBO to make sure everybody's successful. And so we were going to consider a pre-registration process, but because we didn't anticipate that when we developed our volume 2, it was kind of a really great recommendation that was recommended by our consultant, but that just won't work out. The timeline's too short, and we have 11 and a half months. Well, actually 11 months now. So we don't have a lot of time to kind of do nice to have, but that means that we're going to have to spend a lot of time on the front end with technical assistance for people. So that's where we are with the timeline. We're still tracking to have BEAD mainly wrapped up in terms of application, and closing that application this year, and reviewing projects this year. So we're chugging really nicely. I'm proud to say that we were the 8th state to be approved by the NTIA, so that's a big deal. And then on the challenge side of the house, we are done with challenge process. We are slowly getting to approval. We should expect an approval on our challenge data here soon. It's just tidying up the last few locations. And again, if your locations aren't on the BEAD list, they are not eligible. So for BEAD funding, it doesn't mean that they're not eligible for state funding, but if they're not on that list, they're not getting funded, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I say that really strongly, and I think a lot of folks, when we get that list, are going to want to see those locations maybe, and I don't know, there's a lot of sausage making that happens between the NTIA, the FCC, CostQuest, and the process is the process. And of course, the pencils have to be down at some point. So I just want to reiterate that, because we don't have a lot of flexibility where that list is concerned. We put a lot of effort. The mapping team has done a fantastic job working with stakeholders. So when that list does come out, that'll be kind of the program list, if you will. Go ahead, Ralph.
Did you experience a lot of changes between, through the challenge process? Were there many locations added or subtracted, or do you have a sense of how much was changed?
Yeah, so Megan isn't on the call, so I might be speaking out of tongue a little bit here, but in the challenge submittals, we had around, I want to say, around 280,000, 270,000 data points that changed in the map. And so there was our data, there was also data that people submitted, and then there was also the FCC they continue to refine the map. They're always updating the map. So we've been working on about 250,000 data points between now and previously. So again, I don't have them broken out by who submitted who, because that is not information that the FCC ever provides us. So, but we do have them, we do have them by location type and aggregate. So the CAIs, unserved, underserved, different types of locations, so residence, business locations. So data that's available to the public, but we don't necessarily know who submitted what when at the end of the day. And for us, that we know what we submitted, but we don't know what everybody else submitted. So
No,
I'm just tracking at a high level.
Yeah, I wasn't asking for specifics. So of those 280,000, those are additional locations, or those are just locations that have changed their status?
It's both. And so we didn't add 280,000 locations to the map. It's just the data that we are correcting, if you will.
Okay. Thanks.
The new list we have about 160,000 eligible locations, give or take a few at this point, in the BEAD program. All right, any more questions on that? All right, so I don't want to take too much time on the BEAD next steps. I know that the data is out there, but I just want to give everybody a reminder of what we're doing and how much is happening behind the scenes. But there's a few critical points: is making sure that the application portal gets stood up, and then also making sure that we launch public comment mid-July. So we're almost there. Once we launch phase 1, the timeline is set, because obviously in volume 2, it's very, very, very specific and very laid out. And we added a number of days in our timeline just to accommodate the dates, but once phase 2 launches, the clock really, really starts for the actual implementation side of the house. Any more questions on volume 2 before we move on? All right, go ahead. Jonas, do you want to talk a little bit about our Department of Labor grant program that we're working on? I know the team's working really hard on that timeline. Actually, I think it's due today, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, when we talk about supporting BEAD, one of the things I think sometimes we forget about is the need to support the workforce shortage that we're going to experience because of BEAD and CPF. So as you all know, CBO worked on a workforce development plan that we collaborated with the CDLE and Office of Future Work on at the beginning of the year. And recently we have started to put that plan into action by putting together a core working team made up of individuals from the telecom industry, the staffing industry, the labor unions, tribes, as well as higher education as well, to start developing potential curriculums and really just a roadmap of how to start closing those gaps in the broadband workforce shortage that we're anticipating. So most recently, I'm pleased to announce that we've partnered with the Colorado Rural Workforce Consortium on its Building Pathways to Infrastructure Jobs grant that's aimed at funding broadband workforce development. So we've spent the last 2 weeks supporting CDLE, who's the lead applicant in preparing this $2 million application, and it will help fund resources, initial resources, I should say, needed to support broadband workforce. So the application, as Brandy said, is being submitted today on time, and we'll be sure to keep you all updated on the status of that application as things continue to move forward. Any questions about that before we move on? Okay, then. Let's see here. So next, I'm gonna give you an update on the topic you all have been demanding for a few months now, middle mile. As we've communicated the last few times we've all met, Brandy and I have been working behind the scenes on some middle mile concepts that we've really needed to flesh out enough to run by OIT leadership before we could take any next steps. And now that we've recently received the green light from our leadership, we're ready to loop you all into that discussion and start really collaborating on the CBO's middle mile initiative. So we've been working closely with CDOT and DOLA on some ideas, and although no decisions have been made, I do believe that we're finally at a point where the CBO is well positioned to move forward with middle mile. And so I want to go over some of the concepts that we've been discussing internally and then get everyone's feedback on what we're not thinking of, and really hear from you all on how we can be more successful in the planning and implementation of a statewide open access middle mile network. So let me pull up some slides that I want to go over, and we'll jump right into this. So as a refresher, the reason we need to really get serious about middle mile is that it really helps support our goal to provide 99% connectivity of the state when it comes to broadband. This is really part of the governor's executive order. For anyone who might not be familiar with what a middle mile network is, it's really, I like to refer to it as being similar to a highway system. You've got your backbone and long haul that you can kind of think of as like the interstate system that connects all the major cities. Then you've got your middle mile network, and that's like your main highways that connect you to the rural areas of the state. And then your last mile would be like the streets and the roads of those rural communities. And I think we've done a great job funding the development of those streets and roads in small communities with the last mile infrastructure. But what we're really missing are those highways that get us from Denver to, Durango, Denver to Salida, and all these connecting communities throughout the way that have been neglected over the years. So the benefits of a middle mile network are that it really helps us, it's going to help us expand these networks and get closer to these unserved and underserved areas. It's going to help drive down prices and promote competition among ISPs. It's going to help with the connectivity of schools and libraries, healthcare, national parks. It's going to help with economic development, and it provides a level of redundancy. When we talk about the current landscape, middle mile for the most part has always been provided by private networks, your Lumens, your Comcast, your Zaos. And although they've done a great job connecting the metro areas, unfortunately, they've neglected the hard to reach areas. And because of that, it's just, we don't have middle mile infrastructure to connect all this last mile. There's a lot of gaps because there's no return on investment for these large companies to spend the money and build these expensive networks to communities that might not get much of a subscriber base out of it. So with that, it's left a lot of emerging public networks to start popping up that are launched by a lot of local agencies and smaller government entities. You've got your Region 9, Region 10, SCED, Northwest COG has done a great job with Project Thor. And so in order, I think, for BEAD and some of these smaller last mile funded projects to be successful, we've really got to step up and take more of a lead on implementing something that makes sense from a middle mile perspective. Here's what some of the other states have done. California just signed a $400 million contract with Lumen to manage and operate a statewide network for California. Nevada took a similar approach with contracting with Zayo for $250 million to manage their statewide network. Arizona did something similar. They brought in a vendor who will operate, maintain, and commercialize a statewide open access network. And then you've got Utah, who really has leaned on their Department of Transportation over the last 20 years to build and operate a statewide open access middle mile network. It's been very successful, but Colorado hasn't been able to leverage CDOT the same way that Utah has been able to leverage UDOT. So I think that creates a case for CBO to get involved and really lead the effort in Colorado to make something happen. So we're going to move forward with a middle mile initiative and really try to push the idea of a state-owned network that the CBO can get behind and manage. So a lot to take into consideration, though. Capacity. CBO has to hire middle mile program staff. Right now, we don't have the resources to be successful with that. So we're going to have to bring in some resources to help push that initiative. There's a lot of legislative policy that will have to be considered as well. Right now, CBO is working very closely with CDOT to establish all of the regulatory requirements and contracting needs and make sure that we've got that ironed out so that we can move forward efficiently. And then there's the funding piece. Right now, we don't have any funding available for a state-owned middle mile network. So that'll have to be figured out as well. Some of the primary considerations. Number one, we've got to understand what's in the ground today and how we can best leverage that. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of accurate data around CDOT's fiber, and so that needs to be addressed. In order for us to be successful, we've got to have clear and accurate data of what's in the ground today. And then we've got to be able to use that fiber to drive broadband development. That hasn't been successful before now. A lot of the state-owned fiber is used for transportation purposes only, and that's the primary objective. If the CBO is involved, that's something that we can help change and really support some of those state and federal funding requirements and efforts. Then you've got the O&M piece. We've got to be able to commercialize some of that excess fiber to help offset the operation and maintenance costs associated with operating and managing a statewide owned network. Best way to do that is have a centralized management. With all these networks in place, how do we stitch them all together under one umbrella and have someone really centralizing that management? There's a lot of benefits there. Like I said before, we'll be able to shift the focus to expanding access and improving broadband infrastructure for broadband purposes. It's going to allow us to target a lot of the areas in the state with the greatest need and really push those middle mile efforts to support those areas. We're going to be able to maximize a lot of the funding opportunities that the CBO has to support middle mile. Also, expertise. We've got so many great folks and stakeholders involved in all of this, folks like yourself that we want to be able to leverage and collaborate with in order to make this successful. So we feel like we've got a lot of the puzzle pieces in position today to be successful with a middle mile program. And I think that there's some ways that we can kick this off that are interesting and creative and strategic that I think a lot of folks can get behind. We're very interested in a network integration pilot with Project Thor. We've been working closely with the Northwest COG and the folks behind the scenes there on what that might look like. And that's something that we're taking into consideration. What would it look like if the CBO got involved with Project Thor and helped manage and maintain that network and collaborated on its future operation? For those of you that don't know, Project Thor is run by the Northwest Council of Governments, and they have about 400 miles of network that serves about 10 counties in the state. Many communities have been able to take advantage of this network. It's been a very successful program. It's partly funded by DOLA. So there's a real opportunity for the CBO to get involved and help integrate that network moving forward at a state level. So that's something that we continue to talk about behind the scenes and want to make sure that we're able to collaborate with everyone on going forward. In order to do that, there's a lot that goes into it. We've got to work with everyone and make sure we're really doing our due diligence behind the scenes, that we understand the financial, regulatory, and contractual pieces to this all and how the CBO can best support that going forward if there was any kind of transition. There's a lot of integration planning involved from a technical and organizational piece. Operational readiness. There's management and support systems and integration that has to happen on that level that we need to be aware of and planning for. But most importantly, the customer and stakeholder communication piece. If the CBO were to get involved with something like that, do we have the support from the customers who are on that network? And are we speaking with them to understand their concerns and answering those questions? So stakeholdering will be a huge piece of this. A lot of strategic planning goes into motion if we are to move forward with something like this. More on that stakeholdering piece. This is something that we take very serious. We want to make sure we're working with everyone involved and anyone it may impact to work with them on what that success looks like. So you can bet that there's going to be a lot of engagement planning, much like we do with you all. We will set up roundtables and make sure that there are feedback loops in place so that we are hearing from everyone and taking everyone's ideas, questions, and thoughts into consideration as we move something like this forward. Back to the inventory piece. So in order, I think, for us to take advantage of what's in the ground today, we have to move forward with some kind of inventory and audit of what the state has under the ground and what can be accessed. I can tell you, coming from the CDOT side, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to that data. There's a lot of gaps there, and CDOT would admit that themselves. So, we got to look at bringing someone in that can help us perform some kind of audit and inventory to understanding how we can leverage that fiber efficiently. Yes, Ralph.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it seems like an inventory of not just Colorado's state-owned fiber infrastructure, but other existing fiber that's out there. I don't know that because if we overbuild existing infrastructure, it doesn't seem like a good use of money. Am I misunderstanding you?
Maybe. I think where it starts is, what does the state have access to? Well, we start with the state-owned fiber, right? That's what we can leverage and have access to. And keep in mind, a lot of Project Thor's fiber, that's on CDOT leased fiber, so that's state-owned fiber as well. That's really what we have control over, right? We can't go to other industry providers and say, we need to understand what you have in the ground today. Unfortunately, they don't have to share that information with us. Yes, Eric.
Yeah, on that topic, I mean, it also is true that a lot of Thor is not CDOT, and so obviously they utilize the resources that were available to interconnect the communities, whether they were CDOT or not. So to Ralph's point, understand you have to start where, start at home. Get your own house in order, so to speak. Makes sense. But some of what we've been preaching in the last couple of months is get some sort of a list of dark fiber leasable, especially the ones that will publicly share those routes. Just thinking of Tri-State and Zayo, not those that are a little closer to the vest, like CenturyLink. You can still get access to them, but it takes a little bit more hoop jumping to get knowing where the routes are and what's available. But it seems like that will be critical as well as as a subcomponent of the inventory process, to not just look at CDOT inventory, but what else is available to us. And that's the thing that Ralph talked about last time, that we'd already started partway down that path, because that's what we've had to have done, and we included CDOT, of course. That was, like we said, over Wolf Creek, there was no other option. So we're going to, definitely want to know what's available and where it is. But
no, completely agree. I think that at the end of the day, we need to leverage all opportunities and options available. And that's certainly something that we'll take into consideration and make sure that we're able to take advantage of. But you're right. I mean, there's so much fiber in the ground today. I think that, we need to take advantage of that first before we start looking at building anything in addition to what exists today. So spot on. Agree with you 100%. There's also
one last point, just Jonas, real quickly too. We have to level set around what people can expect. I mean, this is a 10 to 20 year process. And so, you know, a lot of this inventory will be done in phases. Like, what are we prioritizing? So yeah, get your house in order. We'll learn a lot we'll do a lot through our discovery process with stakeholders, like what assets are out there that we don't have available to. So yeah, it's all of the above, but it's a timing piece and a funding piece, and we'll have to kind of chip away at the old block, if you will, on getting the full inventory of the state too. And so we'll get to it, and it's needed, and we'll just have to phase everything, because that's what we do in government, because it's hard to drop, you know, a lot of money at the same time, but it's a process. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I realize that a full inventory, obviously this is a long-term project, because are you ever really done? Is
No.
the question. But a partial, and don't discount the value as somebody who's actually had to use it locally of a partial inventory, because if that partial inventory tells you of something that's useful to you in your local area, then you didn't know existed. Like if I found out for instance, that Tri-State had fiber from Pagosa to Durango on their lines on a optical ground wire, I wouldn't have worked, you know, over a year with those 4 other entities to try to make the access through the Southern Ute tribe to get to Ignacio. I wouldn't have had to have. Now, we may have still done some of it just for other benefits, but that wouldn't have been the only way to get from east to west that doesn't exist right now. So even knowing that something might exist will help a regional partner not overbuild and put their efforts into something that could have just taken a phone call and getting some dark fiber release rates. So don't let, what is that old phrase? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And definitely a partial inventory is definitely useful in and of itself. Oops.
For sure. This will start out in a partial inventory, because it'll take 10 to 15 years to get everything. And to your point, it's not done. So we're going to rely on our local experts to help us with some of those conversations. But yeah, Ralph, and then we need to move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what Eric and I were talking about is, you know, there's some knowledge out there that we could begin to help pull that together. I understand your focus on CDOT, and that's great. This could be complementary. And I think there's an interest in doing that. So I just would like to do it in a coordinated way.
Yep. Thanks for that, Ralph. Go ahead, Jonas.
Yeah, well said, Ralph and Eric. We appreciate that feedback. And as Brandy said, it's a phased approach. A lot of this is going to happen in parallel. When we look at the deployment part of it, that's phased. We've got to really understand what it's going to take to integrate all of this. And be able to acquire these networks and stitch them together. That takes a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. So we'll be doing this in bite-sized chunks. There's the integration piece as well. We really have to have a detailed roadmap that provides a clear path to success when it comes to the operational, technical, and organizational aspects that would allow a seamless integration of all these systems and processes and personnel. There's so much that goes into it. Then there's the viability. How do we maximize the viability of a middle mile network on an ongoing basis? I think in order to be successful and put together a cohesive and robust roadmap, we've got to probably do an RFP and get some key short-term and long-term deliverables. That inventory piece, that's going to be one of those. That's very important. It's going to be ongoing. I think we could probably say that this will always be a partial piece of data, because it's always going to be changing and we're always going to have to be updating it. So I don't see that ever ending, and we'll work with what we have to move forward as quickly as we can with what that looks like. Moving on to number 2, understanding what that integration piece of bringing on Project Thor really looks like, and having that roadmap include all the due diligence that goes into that strategic roadmap. That's key. And then, of course, the stakeholder engagement strategy. That's one of the most important items in these deliverables as well, making sure that we are consulting with everyone impacted to ensure our success. And then understanding the middle mile network operational costs and monitoring and management that goes into that. That's the long-term piece, and potentially commercializing the network and being able to leverage that. That's really long-term and one of the last key deliverables in this initiative. So we want to bring on a consultant to help us pull this off. We're looking at some time, hopefully this summer, definitely this summer, to publish that RFP and get some feedback on who can do what. We'd like to execute a contract with that potential vendor sometime in the winter, early 2025 of next year. Going into late 2025, 26, start looking at developing that fiber inventory and putting together the network integration pilot and planning that we're speaking about. And then the last piece also in late 2025, 2026, finalizing that integration and really transitioning Project Thor into a CBO environment. So next steps, publish that RFP, partner with a consultant who can implement a stakeholder engagement strategy, finalize the middle mile roadmap, and start taking a look at the network integration feasibility. And with that, I'll turn it over to part 2 of our middle mile initiative and hand it back over to Brandy.
Great, Jonas. If you can do the next slide for me, that'd be awesome. Actually, not right now, whenever we get there. Thanks so much. Yeah, so really quickly on the Middle Mile Initiative Part 2, this is our grant funding. This is through House Bill 1336. We had officially dedicated funding to Middle Mile in this program to the tune of $5 to $8 million a year, depending on revenues in this program. Just want to give you an update on where we are with what we're doing with this program right now. And so there's a couple of pieces to the program itself, but I'll speak specifically to Middle Mile. Our legislation is effective September 1st. Our goal is to launch the grant guidelines for public review in September when that legislation becomes effective. And so we'll give folks, I think it's 30 days for public comment. I'll have to go back to legislation, but we'll take public comment, hoping to also at the same time launch our rulemaking process around this, because in the legislation itself, it talks about rulemaking on specifics. And so to me, they're the same process, if you will, but just maybe called out a little differently because some are more specific than others in terms of the feedback we're trying to achieve. So we're going to meet as a team to talk about what rulemaking looks like. Again, OIT hasn't really done any rulemaking. We do have the authority to do rulemaking, so this is an issue for us. And it's a shoe we're really happy to finally wear. And so we're doing it on a few other initiatives that are OIT related, but not CBO related. So we think it's kind of an effective, more nimble way to kind of come up with rules for programs when it makes sense. Sometimes when you do it all in the legislative environment, it takes a long time to you tweak things or, and sort of. So we're trying to kind of be efficient in our rulemaking and standing up procedures too. So bear with us as we get that dialed in. We're excited to launch the program, at least the program guidelines. We will finalize those guidelines this year. We have until the end of December to launch the program or finish up the grant guideline piece. We will be doing technical support and outreach for the program once we launch it. Looking to do a program launch in 2025. I wish we could do it sooner, but we have our work cut out for us, and we have a timeline that kind of puts us out to the end of the year anyway. And so the grant applications will open in 2025. I do not have a date because we're still figuring out what we're doing with the program, but we have a draft proposals from staff, so we're mulling that over today and probably setting up some working groups around our grant guidelines. But again, just a reminder, it's a 2-tiered structure, so it's not just all Middle Mile. We have other broadband priorities like pole attachments. We'll talk a little bit about that if we have time here today, but and digital equity and workforce. So recognizing that there's a lot of things that aren't funded by the feds that still need to be funded. So we kind of put that in tier 2. And then, like I said, local government can apply now. I know under the previous program, it was mainly industry, but we open it up for everybody, very similar to our federal programs, to maximize really the partnerships and collaboration. which we're seeing a lot of, and industry partnering with local governments and local governments being the applicant. I think the more we work together, the more opportunities we can to continue to help connect people to broadband. So that's it for our middle mile program. I'll just stop there and see if anybody has any questions right now on kind of what we presented. Again, like I tell people, when we look at other states like Utah and Arizona, especially Utah, which is a model, they're 20 years ahead of us. So I just want to level set and really just let you know that we're not starting from scratch because the state has funded middle mile. I want to give a nod to DOLA, who's done a lot in this space, as well as DORA when the Broadband Deployment Fund was under DORA. So it's not like the state hasn't done broadband stuff. We just have a long ways to go on the middle mile program. But today is not day 0, it's day probably 10 for the state, but we have a lot more days ahead of us to nail this. And good news is we have a lot of models to look at, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, if you will. But it's going to be a process, and we're excited to start it. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. First of all, I would just like to thank Brandy and Jonas for putting this together. Obviously, we've been asking for something to discuss and to look at for a few months or longer. I don't know how long we started talking about it, but obviously you put some good thought and work into it. So we appreciate you bringing that to the table. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we could discuss. I'd love to discuss about the details of it that we don't have time for today. So maybe we can get to that at later meetings as kind of chunk it up or something is what I would suggest. The one thing that I thought that it's not really what's missing, but it's something that I've noted is it's almost a different component of middle mile. It's almost like ultra local middle mile that is not necessarily ever talked about, that still is very integral for ISPs to be able to pencil getting to more rural locations. And I think it applies pretty much everywhere out of a major metro area in Colorado. So it's down county roads, it's down sometimes just private drives that in some places are like 10 miles. Like, well, how will we ever get to those? Maybe we won't, but we're tasked to. So it's still a form of middle mile in that it provides that connection to the actual end user, especially in the residential sense. And I think local co-ops are a lot of the answer that has been discussed in like Mountain Connect and other locations for a while to get to rural America. And so I want to bring those into that in that really ultra local middle mile component as well. Not that you can inventory that, but just, for us to start to think about it, because wouldn't it be great if that was already something that was there when we're talking about deploying BEAD or CPF or anything else, because then they would just be able to, you're going to just tap in at the this intersection of county roads where we already have fiber. So that's a component. Jonas mentioned, is there anything missing? It's like, well, that's the component that's built off of that middle mile that you discussed, and then the backhaul that you discussed, that's kind of one step even lower down to the actual user.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we understand that that's a missing link too, and it's all tied together, right? And so those are things that we'll be looking at over the long term in our strategy. I want to give some others an opportunity who haven't spoken yet to speak, like Commissioner Silka, Nathan, Sandra. Do you guys and Carrie? I see Carrie on the call. Does anybody have any other reactions? Just want to create some space for you all.
Hi, this is Commissioner Matt Salka. No, thank you very much. I also was I got provided this information a little bit earlier than this meeting, so not from you guys, but from Region 10 area. So I'm full aware and really appreciate Jonas and Brandy, all your work and your team's work on this. Looking forward to it. I understand, it's going to take some time, but really looking forward to, let's figure out what fiber we've got in the ground and benefit from what we already have, so we don't have to spend unnecessary funds, so we can expand that network elsewhere. So, but very excited about this plan and looking forward to next steps.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Silka.
I would agree. I don't have any real comments right now. As we've talked about this, I think this transition makes a lot of sense to help really build out some of these areas. I think there's some good partnerships that have already formed. So.
Andrew, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes,
Go ahead,
well,
Sandra.
I wanted to say that I was going to ask some questions, but in essence of time, I won't do that. But I did send them over to you and to Jonas. So if you could respond as soon as
Yeah,
you're
we can answer them. We can answer them now in the meeting, Sandra. So thank you for sending them over ahead of time.
okay.
All right. Before we close out on the line, I know Carrie jumped off. Did I miss anybody in the chat? Or okay, I don't think I did. So Sandra, if you're okay, I'll just kind of go over that. And again, thank you. I appreciate the questions ahead of time. Very helpful. If anybody ever does that, we appreciate them. So if you have any thoughts, let us know. But question number one, what is the anticipated amount of locations and deployment funds that are likely to go fixed wireless? We have some preliminary calculations on that, Sandra. We're breaking down our high cost per location threshold technology mix by planning and management region for the state. We might have to consolidate a few that are very similar in their technology mixes, but at this point, it'll be on a regional basis. And I will tell you that in most of our regions, if not all of them, there is a mix of fixed wireless and fiber. And it could be anywhere from 80% fiber to 20% fixed wireless in some cases. And then also for cases for areas that are very well covered, that are cheaper to build, we're looking at like 98%, 2%, or 3%. So we're breaking that down right now. In our grant guidelines, when we launch BEAD, we will have the technology mixes per area that we're thinking about. We're not going to put the cost to it because that's kind of inside baseball for us to help kind of figure out our funding piece. But we will be we will try to be specific in where we're fine with it, where we think there's a pretty good case for fixed wireless, more fixed wireless than fiber. So that's to be determined. And then confirming the labor standards in approved volume 2. Yes, volume 2 that's approved are the labor standards. We will come out with additional guidance if we need to, but what's in volume 2 is what is the law of the land. And then also just a nod for labor, we're really trying to beef up our labor support through that grant that we talked about earlier, as well as funding labor partnerships in our state broadband program, because we don't have any funding yet to do that. So we're coming up with our guidelines around that. So whenever we do, I would say stay tuned to that, and maybe I can send you the document specifically to get your feedback, because we will be doing public comment on that. So definitely want your eyes on it. What date will the state start accepting applications? I think I kind of went over that. End of August, early September. Understanding the state's BEAD workforce plans, what the state is doing. What is the state doing to carry out each plan each quarter? Again, we're in the process of identifying funding for that. So between the grants that we have going on, and then partnering with CDLE, as well as launching our grant program next year, there'll be funds available for implementing our workforce plan, because that's a big deal for us. So we do have funding. It's kind of like a hurry up and wait sort of situation. Those funds will be available to us in 2025. And then which documents will be posted publicly through the RFP process and awards, assuming you're talking about BEAD. Everything that's in volume 2 that we said we were going to publish publicly will be available. So just go back to volume 2, and those phases, mainly phase 1 and phase 1, and then also phase 3, I believe there's also call out for what we're publishing. So did that answer your question, Sandra?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, and if you need anything else, just let us know.
Okay, thanks.
On to the new, I already went over the broadband deployment fund, so just want to take 10 minutes to hop into some group topics. Again, these are just things that we threw out there just to see what you guys are thinking. Any initial reactions to volume 2, points of clarification? Again, we're developing our grant guidelines to clarify some points. So if there's something that just doesn't make sense to you, please let us know. And then I also want to know if you guys are experiencing any escalations and serious escalations in make ready costs, leveraging our utility providers. And then And then if there's any like technical assistance focused areas, be thinking about that. We don't have to like go into that today. But definitely for next month when we probably should talk about it sooner rather than later. What types of technical assistance do you think people are going to need for these applications to fill out? And any topics you guys have?
Well, I mean, we've talked about make-ready costs escalating in the past for some of the regional sort of Larimer County projects, depending on the REA involved. If they've been involved in the past with fiber projects, I think it's been a little bit more straightforward. In Southern Colorado, there's some projects that are going where make-ready is a little more understandable. It also happens to be that the ISP and the REA, so to speak, the electric provider, are more closely connected to each other historically. In other cases, we've seen some pretty dramatic increases, but I think you guys have been aware of that at this point already. But it's working through that process with them.
Yeah, I'm just curious if it's a regional thing versus a statewide thing.
I can't really say for every region, but I mean, we've definitely seen some higher costs for some of our local REAs, but they just are more stringent and probably validly so, from being fairly loosey-goosey in the past and letting just everybody attach without keeping, and then it leads to an issue where they don't know what's on their poles and they really don't know what the load analysis is. Makes it tough to do current load analysis because you don't know what else on the poles besides the one you're trying to add. And so you could end up with all the cost of the software that they might require, the PE that's actually got the right field of study to do the load analysis as a structural engineer. That's all the cost you have to do before there's whatever the co-op itself may, or the REA may require as far as their cost. And then that's not even counting what the make ready is. So that's a lot of investment and cost to find out what your make ready is. So you're already kind of in on the aerial path if there was an alternative quite a ways at that point. So in a lot of cases, what we're finding is folks are just going underground if they can to begin with, because they don't have maybe as much unknown except for things like rock. But if they can take care of that by doing rock saw or something like that, that's more predictable, then it might be more costly than aerial in the end, but they don't have the uncertainties when they're trying to cost out a project.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some of the folks that we're seeing in our programs that are having those escalations, I always ask them, I'm like, well, did you do an analysis for underground? And some of them say yes, and some of them say no, because it might be less money or close to it. I don't know, but you're right. I think the unknowns are the biggest piece for these projects. Unknown costs are just they're really hard to account for.
I think everybody thinks that aerial is just cheaper, and sometimes it's not, or it's equal. And then the unknowns almost make it worse, because if you knew it was going to be equal, well, you might have considered the other alternatives. But so going with the predictable sometimes is better.
Yeah.
That's what we're starting to look forward on for BEAD as well, is the predictability.
Yeah, whenever I did broadband in my town in Eagle, we did that. It was just much easier to go underground. We just avoided the poles altogether because of everything that you mentioned, and it ended up being cheaper because of there wasn't any unknowns. And I mean, other than cobble and just the rock, rocks are easier sometimes. But yeah, I think that's kind of been our message. Well, I think that's a message that we need to probably, I don't know, message to folks when they're applying to our programs. Have you considered both? An analysis for both? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, and sorry, my computer forced me to do a restart. But and I'm on the tail end here. But like what I'm having concerns on here in La Plata County is some CPF award winners and just the timing of being able to get agreements with pole attachments. And so that's something that I've at least been hearing, at least from residents. Chomping at the bit to be able to get high-speed internet to their home. But with LPA and I'll just say it, Clear Networks, they kind of been hitting some roadblocks with I guess attorneys on both sides. That's the assumption. I haven't heard straight from them. They're pointing fingers at one another. So that's always been a concern with pole attachment agreements.
Yeah, I would say your experience is something that we're hearing across the board. And then you spend a lot of time doing the finger pointing. And this money has a time clock on it, right? And so yeah, it's unfortunate that that's happening as well down there.
And then I believe Eric probably already said it, but that went from our Highway 151 project, went from poles to buried. It was just more cost effective and was able to get the project done to be able to proceed.
Okay. Carrie, I
Yeah,
see
we-
that you
we
hopped back on.
estimated half a
Are your
mil-
members? Sorry, I wanted to hear from Carrie real quick because she hopped back on. Carrie, do you have any feedback from your members? Maybe I'll come back. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh yeah, it was just on what Matt said. I hadn't mentioned that, Matt, but yeah, it was. We thought it was going to be cheaper and maybe built in a sixth of the cost of the budget to be make ready, and still had $500,000 dedicated to that, thinking that would be enough. It ended up being well over 3 million when they did the initial analysis of what the actual make ready would be, which our LPA or REA was going to cover a lot of that, but still it was just going to be years to get that done. It was 666 poles. So it was going to be a 2-year process just to replace the poles, even if they covered a lot of it themselves. So yeah, it was, in the end, it's just going to be, if not cheaper, then at least easier in a lot of ways to do the underground.
Okay. I know we're like 3 minutes away from time. Is there anything that folks are thinking about for our next agenda before we wrap it up today?
The question I have is here soon CCI will be asking for legislation updates. I know it's you're focused on BEAD, but any discussion on any opportunities to help assist on broadband efforts that's not through CBO or OIT, would gladly be able to talk with any of you off air to be able to put that towards a CCI initiative, if any.
Yeah, no, it's good to know that CCI has their timelines set up. It's good. I feel like we always finish the legislative session and then we're turning around and asking for more ideas. So summer goes by really quick. So yeah, we can certainly chat with you offline and see what you're thinking, and if there's any priorities at CCI or you have, we can certainly talk about those. So how about we set up a follow-up?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other agenda items that you guys want to talk about next week? Next month, I just want to make sure that we give ourselves some time to come up with any supporting information that you guys might want to know about what we're working on. Again, by the time we meet next month, the grant guidelines will be out for BEAD. And we'll be working really diligently to get our grant portal set up so that we can make that launch for the application. So if there's anything that comes up in the meantime, please just let us know. We're happy to add it to the agenda. Again, this meeting is your meeting too. And one of the things that we might talk about next time as well is and it's kind of separate, but like especially for the broadband deployment fund, what do we want to do about the grant review working group? We were kicking around some ideas around, is it this group or is it a different version of this group? And so that's a whole different scope of work, but I would like to kind of chit chat about it. So be thinking about what that looks like, maybe bring some ideas to the table when we reconvene next month. So because we'll be working on that program as well. So anyway, it's always a pleasure to sit down with you guys and talk about our programs and collect ideas. I'm glad we're kind of in a better space with Middlemount now that we're able to kind of sit back and breathe a little bit after the legislative session and talk to a few people. But again, it's a process. It'll take a while, but I'm glad we're finally dealing with it. So it'll be really great for all of our stakeholders, including folks that need internet. Anyway, thank you guys so much for your time, and we will see you next month. Take care and have a great holiday weekend.